Thank you for joining us today for the MyStar Learning Series on 3D assessment. First, we'll hear from Barb McIntyre, a retired MyStar teacher and current member of the assessment team.
So we're really going to be looking a lot at how we can use proficiency scales and standards to assess student proficiency and then to encourage and track student growth. Robin, does that sound accurate?
Yep, sounds great.
All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about NGSS assessments and what the vision is for assessment, how we can use standards-based grading and standards-based assessment. We're going to look at some of the grading guidance that we're adding to our pre and post-test assessments. We're going to really spend some time looking at proficiency scales and how those can be used by both teachers and students to track progress. And in particular, we're going to look at SEP, but while we're a little bit focusing on SEP, I would say that it's still NGSS aligned in that there's complete integration of all three dimensions. We're focusing on the SEP, but we are going to be asking students to use DCI knowledge and the lens of the CCC in order to show that proficiency in SEP. So there's really no way we can pull them apart completely. And I think as we get into this a little further, you'll kind of see why all three are very important, regardless of what we're looking at as like the vehicle that carries that standard. So I'm Barb McIntyre, and I am a retired MyStar teacher, and I work on the assessment team now. I taught in Midland, Michigan, and I taught with Robin, and so I volunteer a little bit in his classroom, and I've been really excited, intrigued, impressed with what he's doing in his classroom and the way students are responding. And so we thought this might be a good opportunity to bring Robin in to show you how you might think about using MyStar assessments, modifying MyStar assessments to really motivate students. So Robin, you want to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
Yeah, sure. My name's Robin Allen. I've taught in Midland Public Schools for, gosh, this is my 22nd year. And I've been, we started using standards-based grading quite a while ago, and we've just sort of continued to kind of tweak it as we go along. And now our whole school is actually using standards-based grading, and we all, everybody does it a little bit differently. Our sixth grade science staff does it one way because the kids are just starting out in school, and we thought it was a good way to go. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. I'm really excited. It's gonna be fun.
All right, so before we can get started with what Robin's doing in his classroom, the way he's integrating the standards, using the SEPs as a way to help look at student proficiency and student growth, we wanted to take a quick look at what NGSS aligned assessment looks like, a little bit about like the structure of an assessment and how we can determine student proficiency. And that way, when Robin starts talking a little bit about what's going on in his classroom, hopefully you'll have the background that you need. My intent is to keep my portion about this fairly brief and then really let Robin show what's going on in his classroom, because it is absolutely amazing, like nothing I've ever seen before. So when we talk about NGSS aligned assessment and scoring, the first thing we need to know are the main features of a good NGSS aligned assessment. Good assessments evaluate the student's use of at least two of the three dimensions. So within a given item, you should see evidence of students using a practice, using DCI content, and we often say through the lens of the CCC. So we want them to think about how those two things, what they can learn about cause and effect, or how could we make a prediction using what we've assessed, or how might changing one component of that model predict what might happen. So we ask students to kind of integrate all three dimensions with somewhere within that assessment item. So It's really important that we give students a new scenario or a phenomenon and we give them a task. And we want that scenario or that phenomenon to be related to what they did in the unit, but we also want those things to be new so that we can authentically assess where students are. Those Ideally, it looks like I'm freezing up here. Ideally, those questions should be scaffold and they should lead students through a sense-making process. So if we're asking students to make sense of the world, we need to give them practice with that. And assessments are a really good place to do that. MyStar considers assessment to be an integral part of the learning. So we're going to ask students to work through sense making with a new phenomenon that's related to something they've experienced in the unit. We want to give them prompts and we want to help them develop a three-dimensional description, explanation, or solve a problem. We use a cluster scenario or a set of related questions to help scaffold students from that really early thinking to a culminating question that should be 2 to 3 dimensional. So most of you are probably familiar with NGSS aligned assessment, and you've probably seen MyStar assessments. We're going to look at one today, but generally the way we structure our assessments when we're writing an assessment, we generally begin with some questions that are scaffolding questions. They're meant to activate student thinking. Often they're about the DCI content. So what we want to do is we want to get those gears moving. We want to get those students thinking about what they've learned in the unit in a new context. So we often ask them a couple kind of easier, maybe multiple choice questions. Sometimes they're one-dimensional, to get those ideas in their head that they're going to need to use to either solve the problem or explain the phenomenon. Then lots of times we'll progress from there to adding in that SEP. So we might give them some data. We might give them a model. We might ask them to take a look at a system, something like that. So lots of times then we'll bring in that SEP, that practice, along with the DCI and ask them to integrate at least those 2 dimensions. Then generally the last part of the question is, like, we call it the putting it all together, a culminating question that requires them to use the CCC also. So explain the phenomenon, solve the problem, but often we try to bring in whatever that CCC is. So is it scale, proportion, and quantity? Is it systems and system models? You know, are we making a prediction using cause and effect? Generally, that's that last most difficult question. So as we structure students through this, we ask them first to consider the phenomenon or problem, and oftentimes we'll give them a few little scaffolding to kind of get that DCI content or to activate what they've learned in the unit. Then we'll ask them to use that practice to gather some evidence. Then we ask them to apply all those scientific principles and start reasoning and then making sense of that phenomenon and solve the problem. And one of the nice things about a structure like this is oftentimes we can help to use that structure to assess student proficiency. So if they're just getting right those first couple scaffolding questions, they're probably at a little lower level of proficiency than if they can take those scaffolding questions and bring in that SEP. If they can use the scaffolding questions, the DCI and the SEP and the CCC, then we know they're getting very close to that level 4 or mastery level. So when Robin starts talking about what's going on in his classroom, oftentimes when we think about assessment, we generally start with DCI and we think about teaching the DCI, using the practice, using the CCC. Robin's doing a lot of really cool things with focusing on the SEP, using the DCI kind of as the vehicle and using that CCC kind of as that mastery level. So his district has really decided to focus on building student proficiency with SEPs, but they're still integrating all of these dimensions. They're just setting it up a little differently and they're modifying some of what we're doing in terms of our assessment. So for example, if Robin's SEPs, and he'll talk about this more later, you know, in 6th grade, he's really working hard on analyzing and interpreting data, in particular graphing, CERs, and modeling. So even if a unit that he's teaching doesn't have modeling as an SEP, he's going to find a way to bring that modeling in so that he can assess student proficiency with modeling in every unit he teaches. So it's a little bit of a different approach, but it's still very NGSS aligned. So kind of just getting a sense for what this assessment looks like might be helpful as we get into Robin's piece. So what we'd like you to do is to think about how students are using DCI, SEP, and CCC in a given MyStar assessment item. And we chose unit 6.5 because that's what Robin's been teaching right now. And so a lot of what you're going to see as student work examples later on come from this unit. So here's what we're going to ask you to do. We're going to have you take a look at this assessment item, and it came from the pre-post, the 6.5 enhanced unit pre-post. And here are the different subcomponents that the students will be assessed on using this item. And then you're going to see the question to cluster or bundle. So we've got a little introduction, and then on the next page, we've got part 2A, part 2B, and then the final part 2C, and then the final piece is a CER. And this CER structure is the same as what was used in the unit. So not all CERs have this structure, but this was the structure that was used in the unit, and we want students in the assessment to be familiar. So you'll see that Robin's use of CER doesn't necessarily follow this same structure, but when we write assessments, we look as carefully as we can at the unit, and we try to use whatever structure the unit writer has used. So here's what we'd like you to do with this. You're going to go into a breakout group, and what we'd like you to do is read this over and then determine in each part of this question, where would students be using DCI knowledge? And it could be more than one. So there may be some parts of the question where they would be using all three. And you'll just put a little X to show whether they're using DCI, SEP, or CCC. Where do you see evidence of students having to use those components or those subcomponents? And then if you have time, what is it that they were doing that made you think they were using DCI, SEP, or CCC? This is probably like what we'd like you to talk about. If you have time to add that in, that's great. If not, don't worry about that. What we'd really like you to see is the progression of using these different subcomponents and where these subcomponents are integrated in a bundle. Just to kind of get you ready for what's going to come next. So Lindsay's going to put you into groups. Before we do that though, are there any questions about what you're going to do? Okay, and I also forgot, and I wanted to mention this. Robin's co-teacher, Carrie Limren, is with him today as well. So she may jump in. They have a really cool working relationship. They work so well together, and Carrie is incredibly knowledgeable about proficiency scales and everything that's happening in terms of science assessment. And so Carrie, feel free to jump in if you've got stuff to add too. So, all right, go ahead, and we're gonna just give you about 5 to 7 minutes to do this because we wanna save as much time as possible. So one of the things we really wanted to make sure that you saw with this is that we do try to make sure that every assessment is three-dimensional in its whole. And really the last item should be, that 2D really should be three-dimensional. 2C is interesting because we really wanted to make sure that we pointed them to the data that we wanted them to use as evidence. And so we asked a question specifically to make sure that they were reading that graph. And that way, if students really struggled with the CER, you could see as a teacher, was it that they couldn't analyze and interpret data on 2C? Did they make a mistake there that threw the rest of it? So part of what we're trying to do also is help you to see where misconceptions might take place, and also help you to see where students might be falling apart in that sense-making process. So, but the main idea of this was to let you see how really we try to make sure that all of those dimensions are integrated in that item bundle. And just a little aside, I think that's probably what your students are going to encounter when they get to the M step. And I know it's what your students are going to encounter when they get to things like the ACT. We've looked at those. Students are going to be asked to do a lot more than knowledge recall kind of assessment. They are going to have to be able to integrate, read, draw conclusions, all of those sorts of things. So this is a way to hopefully help prepare your students for that. So now let's talk a little bit about how we can tell what some subcomponents are assessed in a given item bundle. In an EA or an embedded assessment, we give you a teacher document, and in that document, it will have all of the subcomponents and all of the key concepts that we are trying to assess. EAs are much more focused and usually have one phenomenon and one cluster of questions. A pre-post, though, really tends to cover, we try to cover all of the subcomponents and as many of the key concepts as possible. So sometimes it can be a little hard. In the example we gave you today, we put all of that information for you right at the top of the document so you would know. But on a regular pre-post, that's not necessarily right there for you. So how can you tell what is being assessed in each item bundle? In the appendix, in the teacher copy of the pre-post, we have an inventory for you, an assessment inventory. And it will show you for each assessment item. So that one would have been assessment item 2, explanation of fish competition. You can see here are, in this column 2, here are the subcomponents that we think we assessed. And probably the difference between the cross-cutting cause and effects had to do with predicting. Assessment item 1, you can see what we think we assessed. Assessment item 3, you can see what we think we assessed. And then in that last column, you can see the lessons where those subcomponents were taught. That can be really helpful. And you'll see when we get to Robin's part where he's focusing on particular SEPs, where he may want to use this to determine which assessment items would be best for him to give to his students, which ones might he want to use as practice, which ones could be modified to do what he wants. So this assessment overview table can really help you if you need to make decisions about which assessment items you want to use. Which ones are you going to score? Which ones might you decide to use as practice? Do you need to give all of them? Or if you're just wanting to learn about what your students can do with constructing explanations, you could pick any of these. So we use both SEPs in all of the assessment items. So maybe you don't want to give all 3. Maybe you're going to give one as a practice or use it in class to teach kids how to take the assessment. And you're going to select a couple of these to give. So this overview table can be really helpful, and that's in the teacher version in our enhanced assessments. So how do we score these things? We really want you to kind of think about leveling. And so when I think about grading one of these bundles, level 1 would be very basic, probably needing some adult or other student help in order to get that very basic proficiency. Maybe they could get to C, maybe they could get to A, but they probably weren't able to do the CER, or at least not the reasoning part very well. Maybe had a little bit of trouble even with 2B. Level 2 is very basic student proficiency. Generally, those students have some DCI knowledge. They understand some of the terminology. They might be able to do some very basic sense making. So they tend to get some of those scaffolding items correct, but the final piece where they have to put it all together can be really difficult for students who are at that basic level of proficiency. Level 3 is our goal. That's where we would like to see most students. They can integrate most of the dimensions, and they're pretty good at making sense of the phenomenon, but maybe they're lacking a little bit of that sophistication in terms of their ability to communicate the integration of all of the subcomponents. So they might not use the CCC to make a prediction, or they might not be able to tell us how changing a component of a model would change an output. So they're having they maybe are close, but not really sophisticated yet. Mastery, we consider to be level 4. They are fully integrating the dimensions, they're making sense of the phenomenon, and they're applying all 3 of those dimensions in a new way. So that CER, arguing from evidence, developing and using a model, maybe revising a claim, those sorts of things. So when I'm scoring student work, I'm looking at that whole cluster, and I'm saying, where do I think this student is in terms of this whole continuum of proficiency? Level 2, basic, they got a few of the scaffolding right. Level 3, proficient, they're doing integration, but it's not at a really sophisticated level. Level 4, mastery, they're integrating and they're doing it in a sophisticated way. So that's how we would encourage you to think about scoring. And if you're using standards-based grading, perfect, it works really well. If you're not using standards-based grading, it's a little bit trickier. So here's what we would do if you're using standard or a traditional grading rather than standards-based. Here is how we would recommend that you grade something. Use that leveling information in your judgment to decide which items or what kind of response will serve as each level of proficiency. What does a student need to get right to be level 2? What would they need to do to be level 3? What would they need to do or get right to be level 4? Then, as you're grading, look at that piece of student work holistically. Sometimes I'll see students that maybe they miss one of the scaffolding ones, but man, that final question, they knock it out of the park. I don't worry too much about that scaffolding question they missed. I think maybe they misread it. I'll ding them a little bit, but I'm really looking. So I tell students, like, swing for the fences on that final putting it all together question. That's where I'm really going to be looking for your ability to put this all together. So as you grade, look at it holistically. Where on that continuum do you think students are based on the evidence they've given you in their responses? Assign them a level, and then you can use a converter to assign a grade. There are lots of these converters out there. You can go online and put standards-based to traditional grading converter. You'll get lots of different things. Here are a couple that we have used. If you look at these though, I mean, we've set level 3 as the target, right? So a level 3 is in the A range. If you're getting into level 4, you're really talking about getting to the top. Now, I know some people convert 2 as a C, level 3 is a B, level 4 is an A, and that's fine. You do whatever you want in your classroom. But if we're saying level 3 is kind of our target, it makes sense. And as you're going to hear from Robin later, and I absolutely agree, it's middle school. Who cares? We want to be about growth. We want to be about learning to work through the sense-making process. But we know you have to assign grades. So here are some possible ways you could do that. So in embedded assessments, we give you the guidance. We give you a teacher doc, and we say, when we wrote this assessment, this is what we thought was evidence of different levels. You had to get these 3 items right to be at a level 2. Those were scaffolding. Then we brought in the SEP on 4 and 5. That's going to get you to level 3. Level 4, this was a really hard stuff where you had to put it all together. That gets you to level 4. But we haven't had anything like that for pre-post. So what we've been working on is adding that kind of guidance to our pre-post tests. And this is kind of what it's going to look like. So in some of our enhanced pre-post, you're going to start seeing this guidance. And for each question, we're going to give you what would the students have to get right to show level 2, in our opinion. You do what works in your classroom, and you're going to see how Robin's changing some of these things. This is what we thought would be evidence of level 3 proficiency. And this is what we thought would be evidence of level 4 proficiency. Notice there's a pattern. The level 2 stuff tends to be early, level 3 stuff tends to be the middle chunk, and the level 4 stuff tends to be the last question that's hard. if I were doing this, I would want to get more grades. I would give them a grade for each question. So I would take question 1 and I would say, oh, they got a 3.5. So that's going to be a minus, and they would have an assessment grade for question 1, a different assessment grade for question 2, a different assessment grade for question 3. And yes, I don't know how to do that, but please unmute and ask, please.
Oh, yeah. So you said give a grade for each question. So would each question be a different standard?
Not always. So you could tell what is being covered using this this overview. So not always is every question a different standard. In this case, question 1, question 2, and question 3, you can kind of see the different PE subcomponents that are covered in each assessment question. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's just some background to kind of get you caught up with what MyStar assessments look like, how we look at leveling, and then we want to turn it over to Robin, and he can tell you a little bit about what he's doing in his classroom, and he and Carrie together, what they're doing in their classroom to use this, but in a really interesting way. So, Robin.
Yeah, this is great. So if you look at the screen, we can go to that next slide.
Okay.
So with the authentic assessment, the way that we got into this, this was quite a few years ago. We were really frustrated with traditional grading, and we were like, our grades really aren't meaning what they should mean. We were doing binder checks and extra credit for tissues, and I mean, it was, it really wasn't what they knew about science. So we started to say, what do these grades mean, and what should they mean? And we came to the conclusion that we wanted the grade to reflect what they knew about science, what they understood. So we basically took 2 grades. We did a learning behavior grade, and then we had a grade for what their understanding in science. It took away the kids that do really well on a test, but can't find their shoes, and don't bring a pencil to class, or lose their homework, or go to the wrong room, but they understand the science. So instead of averaging all of that together and they get a C or a D or a B that really doesn't mean much, we wanted the grade to actually mean something. So we were doing that for a while, and then I thought maybe we could have it mean even more, because the way we were doing it, well, did they understand the DCI? Did they understand the SEP? Were they understanding the CCC? So instead of taking everything and mashing it together for a grade, we thought, like, what do we really want them to leave 6th grade knowing and having mastery and having it covered, so that they have this and it's in their long-term memory. It's not just a unit that they'll forget, and then they'll say, well, no one ever taught me that, when they get to 7th grade. So we decided that SEP 2, 4, and 6, in our opinion, were the ones that we wanted them to leave 6th grade with mastery. They would know it backwards, forwards. They would never have to be taught it again, because they would have it. And so we focused on SEP 2 we focused on creating models. SEP 4, we focused on creating graphs and understanding them. And SEP 6, we were focusing on claim evidence and reasoning. And so that's where this kind of journey that was like 10 years, I guess 10 years in the making now, that's where we are now. And so it talks about how we can really know what students know and what they can do. When you really dive into one subject and go deep and not just cover, and it's all year, it is amazing what they can do, what we found out. Absolutely. It's like, I don't even know. It's just amazing what these kids can do when you really spend a lot of time and learn it to mastery. The student investment, the ownership, everything.
Yeah.
So this is just a glimpse of how the kids keep track of their scores. This is just an example of the graphing. So we use proficiency scales, so we know all of the different science teachers teach from the same scale, so there's no guesswork. So hopefully my 3.0 will be the same as the person that teaches across the hall. My 2.0 will be the same. It isn't me deciding, well, I'm going to take it easy on them or whatever it might be. It's just, you either know this or you don't. They get this at the beginning of the year, so they know exactly what they're working toward. There's not a 4.0 on this, but we do use 4.0s, which we can get into later. But the kids know exactly what they need to do from the beginning of the year. They keep track of these on their own. Now, as you guys all know, kids either don't write things down or they just aren't necessarily the most truthful. So I keep track of it. I also keep track of it. Carrie and I do. This is an example of some of the progression of a graph. And you can see if you start on the left, they're basically defining and identifying the parts of the graph. A lot of them come in and they know how to read a graph, but they don't know anything about X, Y axis, what a graph needs, what this all means. So we make sure that they have the fundamentals, the foundation, which is the 2.0, and that they know it really well. So you can see this person started out with a 1.5 and a 1.5, and they didn't, basically we're just having them circle the X axis, put a box around the Y axis, underline the title, highlight the categories, things like that. And then as they move on and they show that they can do that 2.0 material, they move on to starting to create their own graph. And this is a full year process where we focus on the SEPs as our assessments. The DCIs are the vehicle, and they have to understand the DCIs to get a 3 or a 3.5 or a 4. They need to understand those things. And then the CCCs come into play when they're extending, when they're analyzing these graphs. On the back of some of these, there's some analysis of the graph that they bring in, like cause and effect, predictions, patterns, things of that nature that they use. So we bring it all together, but we do it in almost like climbing a ladder, up the scale and in their understanding. So in any given assessment, I can have 4 different assessments for 4 different levels of kids. I do it all the time. So you would some kids, I would just continue to create a graph for them, or I would do that matching that you can see on the left until they can get it and feel success. And Carrie and I have noticed that when the kids start feeling success, their motivation goes way up. Instead of just giving them the same thing that everybody else is getting and they keep failing, finding out what they can do and then meeting them there, no matter where it is, and then building from that point has really helped us know our kids better. And it's also helped us motivate them to want to strive to continue to grow. And so then at the other end of the spectrum, we'll have the kids that are going for 4.0s that already know how to make the graph. They already know how to analyze it. Now they're doing extra, and it's just amazing to see.
Or those level 4 students are helping a student that hasn't reached a level 3 yet, try to get to a level 3, and then we just mark it with help. Because it doesn't even matter if it says with help, the students just need to know that what they're doing and they're trying and that they can do a level 3, even if it is with help. And it also is, if you can truly teach something, which a level 4 student should be able to do, it also just motivates them to keep reaching for the stars. And it's just a win-win when you can take your level 4 students who now can help you teach the students that haven't quite reached a level 3.
And if you look at the slide, it's really empowering, I think, to the kids, because there's no secrets.
Right.
Everybody knows what we're trying to do.
Yep.
And there's no power struggle. It's just, you have to do this or you don't, and you're still learning. So we use the word yet a lot from the Carol Dweck, from that growth mindset book. It's excellent. So we use the word yet. You're not there yet, but you will be. We use the term grit a lot. But I think agency is one of the most important things that we do. They feel like they have power over their learning. I'm not surprising them with things. I'm not trying to trick them. I'm not doing any of that. It's like we're working together. I mean, as a team, we're trying to get there. And it's so cool when kids that aren't at a 3 are willing to share their papers or whatever it might be, so that we just call them great mistakes. They can help everybody. And you know, it's just nice, but they feel like they have a sense of control, over their learning. And I was a traditional grader for most of my career, and getting kids motivated, I mean, it was very difficult, using a traditional grading system. So it's been really a great journey.
Yeah, and for me, like, to motivate a student who has already gotten the old, to me, like kind of the old fashioned A, because we don't really use letter grades here at Northeast. But now students never stop learning, because that 4, there's never an end to that level 4. The old grading system, that when you reach that level A, okay, now what? Now what am I supposed to do? I already have an A. Now what? Now students create like extended opportunities to prove their learning. Maybe it's, like writing about a graph and analyzing it, but they want to get to that highest level of learning, and they so enjoy it when they do. It's just something to see. So pretty fabulous. Yeah.
Robin, there's a question in the chat. Do you use Google Charts or all paper copies? I go back and forth. Do you think one is better? From Melissa.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've done a little bit of everything. And I'm lucky enough that and we both do. We teach language arts. We're on a team. So I have 2 hours of language arts and then 3 hours of science. And then Carrie's the special ed co-teacher, and she moves around to all the different subjects. But in language arts, we've used something called a growth tracker, which we created ourselves on Google Sheets, where we enter all of the different like bullet points for the proficiency scales to see what level they're at. But just this year, in science, I've only been using paper. I like the kids, so we've been comparing both. And what we've noticed is that in science with the paper, we have like, we call them growth folders, and they're in a filing cabinet. The kids like taking them out, putting them on the table. It's all right in front of them. They can see their growth. I heard them talking today. Wow, I'm going 253, 253, 253. I must not have it yet. Oh, look at me. I went from a 1.5 and now I jumped to a 4. Like, they were just like talking about it. And when it's on the computer, I don't see that sense of ownership as much. I mean, they do check it, but it's not the same.
No, it's like the students who need it the most don't check it. The students who are maybe a 4 will on their own, but the students who need it the most and really need to keep track of their progress do not use it when it's not like on a Google Sheet.
And
so
yeah, maybe you guys have better control of your kids with the computer and all that, but when I say take out your computers and check your growth tracker, well, I mean, for the most part they are, but you know how computers and screens and 6th graders, it's just nice having that paper copy. Plus I'm old, so I just like it. I think it motivates them more than in language arts. So we're going to switch language arts now to a paper copy and give it a try just for this marking period to see if we like it.
So Robin, how did you decide to use the SEPs, and what happens with the DCIs and the CCCs then? If you guys are just focusing on, like, we're going to take a look at what Robin's doing in terms of his scales, but tell us a little bit about how the DCIs and the CCCs come into play when you're really looking for mastery in modeling, analyzing and interpreting data, and constructing explanations.
Yeah, so when we first started doing this, we knew we wanted to make some proficiency scales. So we had to decide what was going to be important to us. And we thought that the most important thing for the kids to leave when they left 6th grade was to think like a scientist, to be able to problem solve, to be able to analyze, to be able to make claims and actually use evidence. So we wanted them thinking like a scientist. We didn't want them to leave trying to get them to memorize all the DCIs. We thought a lot of that, you can see them on the back. I mean, a lot of that we just put a lot of the DCI words right up on the board so they can use them when they analyze. If we were going to try to have them memorize all of these things in one unit, we might be able to cram it into their head, but in 2 weeks, it's going to be gone. The 7th grade teachers are always saying, well, how do we get them to remember these things? But I'm like, well, you can look up these words, right? You can't look up how to analyze. You can't look up the things that we're doing with the DCI, with the SEPs. So we decided that 2, 4, and 6 seemed like a great place to be if they could leave with mastery of those. And it is amazing when you can use the whole year. We're learning this the whole year. So 2, 4, and 6, so we don't leave anybody behind. You know what I mean? It's not like, well, this unit's done. Now we're going to focus on this. So it's been awesome. We have to leave the DCIs behind because we're learning a different content. We're going into in ecology, and we were just learning about digestion, right? But we don't have to ever leave the SEPs behind. They're always there. So that's what we were thinking, to get them in their long-term memory. It's got to be longer than a one or 2 month unit.
And the SEPs work for every unit that you do. Like you can have your students analyze or make a graph on any subject or any CR, any modeling. So it lends itself to every unit possible. And the amount of repetition that it takes to truly commit something to mastery, it takes more than you possibly would ever think. That was my aha moment over COVID. I came back in and said, oh my gosh, I had to say something 1,000 times before it was in their memory. So,
and if you want a good book, read Education Revolution by Horatio Sanchez. And it is absolutely amazing. It talks about it's a lot of brain science, but it talks about repetition, starting with foundation and making sure they have that. If you try jumping into higher level thinking, I mean, it's going to be very rough. But if you can scaffold it to higher level thinking, you'll see a lot more success, and so will the kids.
Robin, could you give me the title of that again, and I'll put it in the slide so everybody has it.
Yeah, Education Revolution.
I'll go see if I can find it.
It's right back there. By Horatio Sanchez.
I got it.
It's kind of like all these books sort of lent themselves to each other. Reading that, the mindset book and Education Revolution, it looks like this, but they all tie in so well together.
So Robin, you've got here instruction versus assessment. So when it comes to the GCIs and the CCCs, can you tell us about that? Like we know you're focusing on these SEPs.
Right.
How is it that, this instruction, how does instruction look different than assessment in your classroom, I guess?
Yeah, so we still, I mean, we still do 3-dimensional instruction. We're still learning about the DCIs. We're still, forming the definitions of all of the different words that are important to the content. It's just when we go to assess, we look at the MyStar assessments and we decide, how do we want to fit this into our scales? So like that graph that you guys saw, we would have had, if we wanted to focus on graphs, we would have had the kids create a graph, create that graph by giving them a chart. If we would have taken all of the other stuff out and created a CER, if we wanted to focus on SEP 6, but throughout the unit, we create our own assessments also so that they have practice throughout. So wherever we feel like this would be a great time for a model, or so I work closely with the other 6th grade teachers and Carrie and in creating these things so that the kids are practicing enough, but we're not overdoing it and they get like graphing fatigue, or they're like, oh, another model, so we try not to overdo it. But most of the teaching is it's the lessons in MyStar, and all of our assessments are formative. I mean, we don't give a summative assessment. I mean, at the end of the year we'll have to, but because it's the end of the year, but everything's a learning. Like the assessments are instruction. I mean, there's no separation between our assessments and instruction. We don't like give these and say, okay, well, I'm judging you now, and that's it. We talk and learn and redo it and revise, and I mean, it's all instruction. There's really no assessment other than those SEPs, and I take a look at how they did.
So one of the things I've seen Robin do in his classroom, he does give, or has given, the full pre-post to give students the experience with that whole sense making, get them ready for end step, get them ready for those sorts of things. I've also seen him take our assessments, and students that were going for level 3 got some of the scaffolding questions to get them ready to create the graph. So they might get some questions, the scenario, they might get a few scaffolding of our scaffolding questions, and then they create the graph and do the analysis. Whereas the kids going for level 4, they've already proven they're at level 3. They maybe don't get as much of the scaffolding. They might get the scenario, but they like, rather than us asking them questions about like which ones showed the most growth, they would have to determine that for themselves from the data and then graph and then explain. So I've seen him take our assessments and pull them apart depending on what different students needed. Does that sound right, Robin?
Yeah, it does. And I really appreciate you guys telling us which SEP is being focused on within the different assessments, because then we can look for that, and it makes it a lot easier for us. But a lot of times we'll have the kids create the model or create the graph, so but we still do a similar assessment. So.
Robin, there's a question in the chat for you. Does that mean you use the check your progress separate or with your formative assessments?
Well, we're doing informal assessments all the time. It's not, we don't wait for check your progress. In fact, sometimes if we, I don't know if the MyStar police are going to get me on this one, Barb, but sometimes if we look at a check your progress and it just isn't going to work for us, we just skip it. We don't follow it. I mean, the lessons are to us another vehicle. Like, they're amazing because they've got that unit challenge and the kids know exactly what's coming up and why they're doing it. We love that.
Mm-hmm.
But really these scales are what's important to us. So sometimes we use the check your progress. Sometimes we don't. We create our own formative assessments. It might just be, hey, look at these numbers. This would be a great time for the kids to show. We call it evidence, graphing evidence, 3.0 evidence. So we just have it. It's basically based on the classroom. We never do anything the same every year, and really not even the same with the same classroom, because Carrie and I only teach one science class together. It's a co-taught class. So that class has different needs. So the assessment I give in third hour doesn't look like the assessment. I mean, it might be similar, but Carrie will be taking some of the kids to read it to them, to scaffold a little bit more. So we don't really, I mean, I don't know if I answered the question. Does it mean to check your progress separate or with your formative assessment? I guess it's to check your progress is a formative assessment also, if we decide to use it.
So the MyStar police say assessments are tools and they're learning tools and they're meant to be used in the way that is best for you in your classroom for your students.
Okay,
they're
thank you.
NGSS aligned so that you can count on that. So, but they're a tool, and that's why this is so cool, is because you're finding a way to use these tools in a slightly different way that is still true to the vision of NGSS, which is great. Robin, because we're getting a little bit short on time and we want to give people some time in the breakout rooms to ask questions, let's kind of talk about these scales and what you do about like level 4.0. And we'll probably skip the activity and just then to make sure we get some time at the end. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about these next 3 slides about how you guys come up with level 2 and level 3, and then we'll also talk about like what do we do with level 4. So
okay. So the level 2, we decided, all right, if they're going to if our goal is to have the kids creating models by the time they leave here, or knowing how to create a model, how to construct one, we decided what do we want to see in the model for pretty much any model that we have. So we decided that these were going to be it for our school for a 2.0. So Carrie and I would create a model. We'd have them identify all the different parts until they had it, until they knew it. It was automatic. They had it to automacy. So once they get to that, then they would go to the 3-point level. Some kids might still be at the 2-point level. No big deal. Some kids might even be at the matching level. That's fine too. But then they would start to create their own models using the DCIs, using the content. And they would need these things in their model, and it needed to make sense, and it had to be signed, you know, it had to what we're learning. If you look over at the picture, that was our practice. They were creating those cells, but then after that, the next day we had them try it independently with I believe it was a disease cell or something that happened there. So they basically just created it again, but without their partner's help. So we do things like that quite a bit.
Mhm.
So then we would check and see if they had everything that they need. Same thing with the graphs. It all looks basically the same. Like I said, there's nothing that we're hiding from them. The kids know exactly what they need to do. And it is amazing to me. Back when I was just traditionally grading and teaching, I didn't think I would ever need to spend this much time on graphing and modeling.
Never.
I
Nope.
thought, oh, they get it.
Yep,
They get it. I covered it.
yep.
We did a couple of them every once in a while. They've got it. They don't got it.
No, they don't.
They don't have it at all.
They don't have it.
It's not even close.
Hallelujah.
No.
So it's taking 1 year. I mean, we've got in some of our non-co-taught classes, most of the kids are now going for 4.0s. I mean, we've got them making these graphs like 5 minutes. They're just,
Yep.
and then they're spending most of their time analyzing them. We're still in our co-taught class. It's a little bit trickier, but we're getting there.
Mhm.
We focus on growth. So, again, here there's writing in the back, and then this was the one where we didn't use the, scaffolding questions. And this was a little bit harder. They had to connect what was learned in the 3.0 section. And then I gave the kids a choice if they wanted to do this one, or if they wanted to do the one with the scaffolding. That was a little bit easier, so they could choose their comfort level. And I don't mind if sometimes the kids that are maybe not ready for it go for a 4, and that's great. And I don't even mind if sometimes the kids that have a 4 their comfort levels at the 3. They sooner or later they start to go, you know what, I think I can do this. It's a confidence thing. So
It is, yeah.
but as you can see, I mean, the way we set it up is the same. Anything else?
Yeah, I was just gonna say a great scaffolding trick that we have found is to do the group practice the day before and the independent practice the next day, because then they've been able to discuss with their table partner, whether they're writing it on boards or a whiteboard or the table. But that is a really, really good strategy. And when it came to the level 2s, well, first of all, they're allowed to see that sheet at any time. The sheets that were just on the slides, they're allowed to look at that at any time. So again, we're not trying to catch them and, whatever. But when it came to the level 2s, we would just ask them, circle the title. The amount of practice that takes to build a solid foundation, it takes a while. That's why I don't think you could ever manage this in a unit. It takes all year to mastery.
And one last thing, what I love is that we don't have to stress out if they don't get it.
That's right.
It's fine. And I tell them it's fine. We're going to do this. You got to tell May.
Stress out.
No, you got to tell May. We don't freak out and go, oh, they don't have this yet. Well, it's fine. I mean,
Robin, one of the things is students keep track of their scores. How do you come up with a grade for them then? Because, if they're starting to keep track of their scores in, say, September, and now, they started at a 1.5, but now they're consistently getting, say, 3 or 3.5s. How do you manage that in terms of your assessment of their proficiency?
Right. Well, we don't average. Okay. So we would never take this line and average them all up. We look at what they've done the last few attempts at evidence. So if we basically tell the kids, I mean, there's no cut and dry rule, but the kids all want to know. So basically I say, if you got 3 3s that are maybe broken up by a 2-5, I know you have this. I know you got it. That 2-5 might just be an outlier. And you've consistently shown this to me. But then, like I was talking about today, there's a boy that has 2-5-3, 2-5-3, 2-5-3. And we talked about it as a class. Do you think he has it? Well, we don't really know. And that's all it is I have to be sure that you've got this before I can say that you're at a 3. And so there's not a formula or anything like that. It's just, what have they done lately? And I don't want to punish them for their practice in September. We don't expect them to be at a 3. So we do have to give a grade because our district makes us. I wouldn't do it if I didn't have to. But I just say, are you growing and trying? And do I think you're going to be at a 3 by the end of the year? Okay, so are you showing growth? And are you giving your best effort at showing growth? That's what I look at. So a lot of kids will be at the end of the first marking period, they're only going to be at a 2. That's just the way it is. But should they get an E, a C, a D? Well, no, they shouldn't. They're going to be at a 3 in May, and that's all that matters. Where are they when they leave our class?
Yeah, and I have to say, like, as a special ed teacher, but anytime working with even lower gen ed students that struggle, this motivates them to know. And like, when I was a kid and I struggled with math, if I got a D or an E, that took all of my self-confidence away. We never ever do that to a child any longer. And they know that if they don't get it this time, or if they don't get it the first 5 times, they can keep trying. And that is a great motivator for all students.
Robin, there's a really great question, and that is, how does a parent, what is a parent reaction to standards-based grading? How do they react to a 1.5? Can you just like briefly touch on how this works with parents?
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of communication, tons. When we first started this, we didn't really know what we were doing. And we had a parent, I can remember them now. In our family, we don't get 2.0s.
Yep.
It's like, oh,
Yep.
oh, yeah, okay, well,
Okay.
that's where we're at right now. So communication is key. The kids will get it. The kids will understand it. The parents will, I've never had any, they love it.
They love it.
They absolutely love it, because at our parent night, we explain it and they're like, this is amazing.
Wish we were taught that way.
Yes,
Wish we
it's
learned that way.
so we've really never had any pushback at all. Other than the fact that, like, sometimes, well, how do we know how they're doing? Because, you have their thing on the their growth folder at the school. And so I just, we take a picture of it or send it to them. But we've never really had any pushback whatsoever. We've just communicated it really well. And when they get it and understand it, it's almost like a sense of relief, especially for the parents of special ed kids.
Absolutely.
They're like, they can keep trying. Yeah, they can keep trying.
As many times as needed. And so the second part of that question was, how do they react to a 1.5? The same thing. I don't see there ever being a negative reaction, no matter what level they're at, as long as they're growing. We always tell kids, we don't care about the grade, we care about your growth, no matter what kind of assessment they take.
So let's go to the other end of the spectrum. What about your typical kids that are your, kind of grade grumbers? They are go for it, high achieving students. They hit your 3.0 by semester. What do you do? What happens for those students? How do you keep them growing? And what's that level for you?
I love it.
Right.
Yeah, I love that, because a lot of kids come in and they're just like, what do you want me to do to get an A? What do I do to get a 3? I don't know. You're gonna have to show me that you can do this. Then they get to 3. What do I do for a 4? And then that's the point where we're like, I don't know. You tell me. You could talk about patterns. You could talk about cause and effect. You could talk about, and then once they start dipping their toe into it, they're off. But a lot of them are grade grubbers, when they first come into 6th grade, although it's kind of nice because at our schools, K through 5, they don't give grades. You know what I mean? So it's that's really nice, but it is a lot of the kids want to know, what do I have to do next? In the 2 and the 3, it's pretty planned out for them, but the 4, if you're really at a level 4, we really want you thinking deeply about this. I'm not going to tell you, and then you're like a robot and just write down what I say for you to do. It's the sky's the limit, and the things that the kids come up with are way better than anything that I would have told them to do anyways. A lot of them are smarter than me. They're gonna have better jobs than me. For me to tell them, well, this is how you get a 4.0, you have to do this. I mean, they can come up with ideas. I just release the control a little bit,
And boy, do they appreciate that. It's just something to see.
And when they really catch on, like he means it. He truly means this. Some of the things that we've seen are just amazing. This boy went home, this was just recent. He made 8 different graphs of the different scenarios that could have happened. And it was so in-depth and it was really cool.
Robin was looking at, they were learning about plant growth and resource availability. And so he analyzed all these different variables and created graphs for all of them, and then had like a paragraph for everyone about how changing one variable. So he was doing that CCC. He was making predictions based on cause and effect. And so, you know, the CCC kind of changes from unit to unit. And so then you can give different maybe options for some of those 4.0. But like, how often is a 6th grader going to do that? But
he would say, what
got
happens
it.
if the rabbits get sick?
Right.
What happens if the rabbits get sick? What happens if a hunter comes in? What happens if bigger rabbits come in? What happens if it was awesome? I'm like, and he understood the science. He understood the DCIs because when they're doing their explanation, I ask them to use a lot of these words in those paragraphs. So they're showing me they understand the DCIs. But it's been pretty great so far.
Okay, so one of the things Robin and I talked about was trying to come up with like, what could we do for a 4-point CCC for students that would be kid friendly, because he's got his scales, but they only go up to 3. And to be honest, in Robin's classes, a lot of his students at this point in the year are going for 4s. They're at 3, 3, 5. And it's so interesting how when he gives them the option, you know, you're going to do this if you want a 3, you're going to do this if you want a 4, like you should see them. They are on fire. They want to achieve, as you know. So this is what we came up with for some possible generic, like kid-friendly language that you could put into an SEP at a level 4, you know, kind of use that CCC or go beyond to get there. All right, we're going to skip all of this. And Robin, and Carrie, are there any other things before we go into breakout rooms that'll give us about 10 minutes to like have an opportunity to ask specific questions to you? Or I don't know, Lindsay, if we want to do like, if there are questions for the good of the group that, you know, it's a fairly small group. Do we want to keep it at one breakout room? You know, whatever you guys want to do.
We could maybe just open the floor to questions, and
Okay.
if anyone wants to unmute or put in the chat or.
Robin, Carrie, is there anything else before we do that you guys want to highlight or talk about?
I would just like to, Robin and I talk about this all the time. I would like to like help change the mindset and for you to really think about, if you're teaching your classes just with content, to really think about how, if you really want your kids to learn something to mastery, like choose something like 3 SEPs, or choose something that you can repeat over and over and over so that kids are using their higher level thinking skills, because just vocabulary they can Google. And it's never going to be it's going to be going out one ear and out the other. So my urgency is that.
Mm-hmm. All right, any questions that you have for Robin or Carrie or Lindsay or me about assessment, about these scales, about how they are doing this in their district? Someone had asked about honors classes. Middle school in Midland, as far as I know, does not have honors classes. Some students grade skip in math, but not in science. So
I have a question about vertical alignment, because I do 7th and 8th grade, and the 6th graders do get a lot of the graphing, and then they come to me in 7th grade, and then they have like a 4.0 version. The 8th graders have a different version of that. But how does your district align then with those SEPs to scaffold them more in general, I should say, like, you know, when you do your CERs and all those other things?
Yeah, I guess in a perfect world, for me, I would hope that we would do like SEP, we would do the 2, 4, and 6, and then 7th grade would focus on another set of SEPs, and 8th grade would focus on another set of SEPs. We're not doing that right now, though. Right now, what we're doing is the 7th and 8th grade are doing more of a traditional, like what MyStar, like they would follow exactly what MyStar has, where they're 3-dimensionally assessing, but they like the fact that they don't have to teach how to make the model, how how to make the graph, how to write a CER. So it's really working for them because that's what they're comfortable with, is doing the more traditional where you take the DCI, the CCC, and the SEP and put it together for a grade. But it seems to be working for them. But that's how we're doing that now.
Robin, there's a question about, well, first of all, did that answer the question?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, when we look at like scale and all those other things, like we try to not exclude them, for 7th per to 8th grade or for the 6th per to 7th grade. But sometimes like there's a disconnect when you think like vertical alignment and how that moves along. And so that was kind of my wondering on how maybe you smush those, together for the grades and everyone's better aligned for the longevity of the students' learning. But that's a problem everywhere you go,
So there's a question here about which MyStar units are you teaching in the year and whether you are using the anchored science books.
We don't use the anchored science books, but we get through four units during the year, and then we usually we'll have a little bit of extra time at the end of the year that we just kind of piece together something fun at the end of the year for the kids. But we teach, I forget all the numbers. I know more about like what we do. We teach the rad disease. That was like as 6.2.
Yes.
And then we teach the digestion with the smoothies.
6-3.
6.3. And then we do the plants.
6-5.
Okay. And then we're on to ecology.
6-6. 6-6.
Yeah.
I'm
So those
trying to get Robin to do 6-4. Everybody doesn't like it because the old version was really hard to teach, but it's been updated and it's my favorite unit.
Yeah, I'm still trying to recover from the time I tried a long time ago. Those red and
The
blue
new one
arrows
is so good.
maybe someday.
Melissa says the new 6-4 is better.
What's 6-4?
That's the cell phone unit.
Maybe
Versus-
Oh, God.
I'm wounded from it. It was tough.
It's good now. Completely different. All right, other questions that people have.
Are we going to be able to see like those scales that you made, the 2 to 3.0 version, besides like the clips on the slideshow? Is there going to be any place in MyStar
Yes,
that we
there's
can
a
go back and
link.
reference?
There's a link right here on the slide. So I think Lindsay put the link to the slide in the chat, but we can put it again. And so if you bring this up, we don't have them as part of the MyStar drive, but there are links here and they should be, let me just make sure that we've got good, I think we've got everybody who has the link as a viewer.
Yeah.
Let me just double check on that. Share, let's see. Everyone with the link can view. So those should be there for you on those associated slides. We should have them all. And then, all right, well, we will hang around for a few minutes. I think Robin and Carrie and I can hang around if you have any other questions. And then I think, Lindsay, what do we have for, okay, we've got a few things to register. If you would like more information, we've got another assessment session coming up, and we've got a session about what's new for next year coming up. And if you're not part of our Facebook community, I would highly recommend a lot of the things that Robin has been talking about. If you ask to be a member, you can see a lot of the things that we were talking about today have been posts on our Facebook community group. And so please request to join that.
Thank you for joining us today for the MyStar Learning Series on 3D assessment. We hope to see you at another session soon.